Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new edition of my podcast, Grit Stories of Resilience. I had hoped to bring you this week an interview or a conversation with Hugh Overholt, a retired Major Star General, two-star general in the United States Army, a former JAG, a lawyer in New Bern, North Carolina, with the law firm of Ward and Smith, and my good friend. He had a conflict of scheduling this week, and we have not been able to record him as we had wished. So therefore, I'm without him today, but I want to talk to you about another topic with the understanding that we will have Hugh coming soon. But before I get started, I want to also mention this next podcast, which I'm going to record this Wednesday with two people whom I have just met in the last several weeks. Mark Beck and his daughter Lily, who is the general manager and part owner of a new hotel. Well, it's not really a new hotel, it's an old one dating back to 1915, but it's new in terms of it's just been restored. And Mark took about 5 or 6 years with his company to restore it to its former grandeur. It was built to service a railroad line through West Jefferson and the North Carolina mountains a long time ago. It features 17 rooms using timbers from the original hotel, a rooftop bar, wonderful dining room, and just a great treat in the mountain town of West Jefferson, North Carolina. And they will tell the story of the restoration of this marvelous hotel. Because what I want to do is bring to you each week some of the most interesting stories I can find about people and places and events that I can do. And that's what I promise to try and do. This week, I want to begin with a story somewhat personal, but a long time ago, back when I was very young, around 10 or 11 years old, living in the eastern North Carolina town of Wake Forest, North Carolina. The only thing Wake Forest had going for it at that time was it was the home of Wake Forest College, a small regional college, somewhat Baptist in origin, and it was moving. It was leaving the town, going to Winston-Salem, 110 miles west, to a new campus, keeping its same name as Wake Forest. And it became eventually in 1967 Wake Forest University. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the late spring of 1956, there was the last graduation on the old campus. And the graduates, dressed up in their caps and gowns, walked past an old well, which was at the center of the campus, and were handed a cup of water as they did so, with my mother, who was standing there handing out the cups of water to each of the graduates. My father was connected with the school. He was the pastor of the campus Baptist church and the chaplain of the college at that time. Well, when the graduates came out about an hour or two later, they saw their friends, their family, their loved ones. They had their pictures taken. And they also saw a lot of Mayflower moving vans. They had already been hard at work moving things before then. But the next day after graduation, they were going to begin in earnest moving everything, because in just a couple of weeks, Wake Forest was going to open a new summer school session in Winston-Salem on the new campus. And so it was that about 137 families moved from the town of Wake Forest in the span of about 30 to 60 days. My family was one of them. And we all congregated pretty much in a series of buildings on the new campus, what became known as the faculty apartments. There were 10 of them. There were 4 families to each building. They were building a narrow street on the side of the campus that would be designated as Faculty Drive. And homes were springing up rapidly as members of the faculty were building new homes. The college had guaranteed the sale of their old homes in the town of Wake Forest. Most of my friends moved with me, but a large number did not. They stayed behind. One of my good friends, a young girl then by the name of Suzanne, she said that they cried the entire summer. It was a very sad time for those who felt that they had been left behind. But the town survived, though it took some time. The Baptist Seminary came and bought the campus, and it took hold. The population rose from about 3,000 or 4,000 to about 7,000 or 8,000. So it was on its way to survival. And with annexation of different areas and geographical locations near Wake Forest, the town grew in size and now sports over 50,000 people within its city limits. That is grit, and that is resilience. And so it was that about 2 weeks ago, at a book club in my apartment complex, which I started, had as a guest a young man named Scott, who turns out to be the nephew of a person left behind, a man by the name of John Rich, who's a lawyer, who became a real estate broker, a great builder in the town of Wake Forest. He and I had lunch together this past week. We reminisced about people left behind, people we met along the way. He asked me a series of questions about all of those who moved, professors who moved. He remembered them all. I asked him questions about people who left behind. I remembered them all. It was just finding again that a family member that had once been broken away has been returned. And so it is that a band of friendship is greater than I thought it was. It's just a great story. And it succeeded by 2 or 3 weeks. A presentation which I had given to a senior citizens group at the Cardinal, which I did a podcast on about 2 weeks ago, showing a video of my presentation there. And I want to tell you about it just a little bit. I was there a little bit early. I was supposed to speak at 3:30. I got there about 3 o'clock. And rather than standing outside, I went inside and shook hands and worked the room, so to speak, as somebody called it, and met lots of the people. I remember standing down in the lobby before I went upstairs to the meeting room and heard this lady talk about how she was a graduate of Wake Forest. So I later introduced myself to her while I was working the room, and she says, "I've never met you, but I know who you are." I said, "How do you know that?" "Well, when I was a junior at Wake Forest, a co-ed, your dad helped me move rooms." I've never forgotten. It was around 1950, 75 years ago. Another lady says, "You don't remember me, but you and I sat next to each other on an airplane trip to Atlanta 40 years ago, 45 years ago, and you were on your way to New Orleans. I remember that. And we talked the entire hour flight to Atlanta." It's just amazing how the circle of people you meet and friends you can make grow outward when you get outside your safety zone and meet new people and do new things. One of the stories that I've talked about in past podcasts has been this concept that if loneliness is considered to be the major cause or a major cause of depression of mental health depression in the United States. One of the ways it's always suggested to overcome loneliness is the short burst of friendship. Not friendship that lasts a month or even a year, but friendship that can last, minutes. Maybe you call them acquaintances rather than friendship. I don't know. But they can be random meetings. And I tell the story, I've told, I think, on this podcast before, of once meeting a young lady who was scanning groceries or helping me scan groceries at the Harris Teeter not far from where I lived. And I remember how nice she was on Thursdays, which is when you have Senior Citizen Day, and she always calls it the young person's discount. Well, as time went on, I kept trying to figure out what her name was. She had a name tag on over her left pocket, and I couldn't quite read what it said. It didn't make sense to me. It looked gibberish to me. And finally, I asked her how you pronounced her name, and she says, you pronounce it Zanash, spelled Zenash, just exactly like it sounds. Okay. I didn't ask her any more questions. And then she disappeared. Just disappeared. I thought she'd quit, gotten another job. 2 or 3 weeks went by, almost a month, and she reappears. And I looked at her one day. I said, where did you go? She said, well, I went home to see my family. Well, it must have been a long trip. She said, well, it was. Well, was it up north? Was it out west? Was it the deep south? Where was it? Oh, it was no place like that. It was not in this country. I looked at her. I said, well, where? And she looked at me. She said, now look at me and look at my name. Where do you think I'm from? And I hesitated because I didn't want to say the wrong thing, but I said, are you from Africa? And she started laughing and said, yes, I am. Where in Africa are you from? She said, I'm from Ethiopia. I looked at her and I said, that's on the other side of Africa. That's next to the Indian Ocean. That's a long way away. She said, oh, it is. I figured I wanted to go home to see my mother and family, and it was going to take a long time. So if I was going to go, I needed to make the trip worthwhile and stay as long, as I could. So that's what I did. I went a long way away. It's nice to be back. And she did not know my name. So I told her. And she said, this is the first job in America that I've ever had. And I said, this is the first job? She says, yes, I married somebody in the military. And so as a result, I'm just working here. And so we got to know her. And we would always speak every time I would come in. She'd always look at me and say, here comes trouble, and laugh. And then she disappeared again. This time she disappeared for months. And I had noticed that she seemed to have gained, some weight before she left. And I didn't know what was causing that. I didn't want to ask any questions about that because I'd once asked the lady in the oyster bar when I was waiting tables, when was her baby due? And she told me she was not pregnant. And that was very awkward and embarrassing. So I didn't want to make that mistake again. So I never asked any questions. This past weekend, about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, I went back to the Harris Teeter to get just a couple of things. As I was walking out behind the customer service desk, there she stood, smiling and waving. I need to tell you, I was really happy to see her. I walked over, I said, how are you? And I'd heard by the grapevine, because I'd asked about her, that she had in fact been pregnant and was giving birth to a child. So how are you doing? You look great. She lost the weight. I said, stand back and let me look at you. And she did. And she said, I said, is it a boy or a girl? She said, it's a boy. He's 6 pounds. I have 2 sons. What's his name? His name is Jonah. Let me show you a picture. And there in the grocery store, at the customer service center, with another lady asking for help, she takes her time and politely shows me the picture of her son, which causes the other lady who's waiting to want to look at it also. It is said that these random kinds of friendships or acquaintances or meetings or whatever you want to call them make us feel better when we leave, to speak to people, to open up. Don't put your head down. Open up and see people. It's like I did not have to go and meet my friend Mark Rich. I was invited by someone else to go, and yet I went. And I went to a place called Side Street. It's in Oakwood, downtown Raleigh, not far from what used to be the Federal Building, 2 blocks away, where I worked as in the U.S. Attorney's Office for 4 years. So I walked in, and there was an older lady behind the counter working there. And I looked at her, I said, you've been here a long time, haven't you? And she looked at me and she smiled. She said, yes, I have. How long have you been here? 20, 30 years? She says, since 1979. I said, I used to come down here a lot. You did? I did. I worked up in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was a prosecutor. I came here a lot because you could walk. And she looked at me and smiled. You're Jim, aren't you? I said, yes. You did that murder case, didn't you? Yes. You know, I always remember you always got a club sandwich on white toast with chips. Always. Do you still have that sandwich? Yes, I do. That's what I'm going to have today. And that is it. 40 some years later, I'm reacquainted with a lady that I had met and talked to briefly, you understand, in her restaurant. It was crowded. They do a good business. They have some of the best sandwiches in Raleigh. And I aim to go back there again soon. Again, this random talking of people. You can do that too. You can do exactly the same thing. The next time somebody asks you at a checkout counter, they look at what you got in your basket, you're making X, Y, and Z, aren't you? Rather than being put off, say, yes, I am. You got any suggestions? Just be open and you'll be amazed what will come out. I have this friend who's a lawyer down in Beaufort, uh, not far from the coast, and she always goes to the grocery store. It takes her such a long time. Her husband won't go with her, even if she has to pick up a few things, because as she goes up and down the aisle of the grocery store, she meets everybody and she talks to them. Strangers. I like your dress. I like your pocketbook. Oh, I love those shoes. Whatever. And she says, I have the best time going to the grocery store. It makes me feel good when I leave. So I asked John Rich about a number of people, 2 of whom became generals in the Army. One who was a crazy guy, lived 3 doors from me. He said, Jim, he was just crazy. He did 3 trips to Vietnam. He was a helicopter pilot for years over in Vietnam. Walked away unscathed. 2 wrote books. One is not doing well. John's sister, whom I knew as Elizabeth, they called her Liz, has passed away a number of years ago. Scott, who introduced us or brought it about, his mother was John's sister. And so it was, someone I had met in the first grade, we are all reacquainted. It's what's something about friendships that makes you feel good. My friend Wade Smith of Raleigh, a renowned lawyer, we met in the spring of 1979 when he was becoming a defense counsel for Jeffrey McDonald. He had a reputation that was preceded him as one of the most outstanding defense lawyers in North Carolina at that time. We became instant friends. I would go to his office. He would play his banjo, and with another law partner of his, Wade Hargrove, they would sing songs. And if we had difficult stresses in the moments, arguing with another lawyer on the other side about the case, Wade would calm the waters. He was always a calming influence. And so we got along. And you know, lots of people want to know how it is that trial lawyers who battle each other so heavily during the course of a trial and yell and scream at each other and try to get one over on the other and that sort of thing, how can they be friends and shake hands and walk out and have a drink or dinner or something after the case is over? How can they do that? Happens all the time. Happens all the time. I remember that when a reporter for a radio station in Chapel Hill interviewed us for a 3-part series a number of years ago, and we spent an hour talking about the McDonald case. Wade quoted 3 lines from my closing argument in the McDonald case and said he has never forgotten those lines and repeated them back on the air. The night that we tried a case against Jimmy Green, then the city lieutenant governor, we were to lose the next day, but that night all seemed possible on both sides. I got a call at home about 6:30 or 7 o'clock from Howard Twiggs, who was a primary lawyer with Wade Smith representing Jimmy Green. Howard Twiggs was one of the most argumentative lawyers you would ever want to go against. He was very good. He's sadly passed away. He was very good. He felt passionately about his clients, passionate about what he was doing. But the reason for calling me that night was simply to tell me how splendid he thought my argument had been that day and how well I had done in the case. I don't know whether I don't know why he called, but I think he called out of friendship and extreme professionalism. There's not quite enough of that today. As I go around the state holding seminars, I hear so much that people who are lawyers say, it's not quite the same as it used to be. It's not quite the profession that it once was. It's now more of a transactional business, and people try to get one over on the other. That didn't mean that back then when I practiced law, we weren't competitive and tried to win our cases. We did. We did. But we never operated awful towards the other side. And while I don't think they always do that today, that's a trait that is in need of coming back. The hotel that I mentioned in the earlier part of this podcast is an interesting story. I want to bring it to you. I want to bring you the story later on of the trial of Jeffrey McDonald. I do that for 2 reasons. One, it's an interesting case. It's a well-known case. And I have noticed that in the times that I have talked about it, more people like to listen to that or view my podcast than many of the other ones that I do. So I'm no idiot. I want to go where people want me to go and talk. So I want to do that. But I also want to just to tell you, it has a cast of characters who exhibit great passion, great grit. There is no one in my life that I've ever met in a legal sense who had greater grit and persistence than Freddie Kassab, who was the stepfather of Colette McDonald, the wife of Jeffrey McDonald. No one comes close to him. He dedicated the rest of his life after these murders to righting this wrong, to pursuing the person who did it. He didn't know at first that it was McDonald. It was hard for him to accept that that was who it was, but he ultimately accepted it. And once he did, he never let up. He never let up. And actually, on his deathbed, he asked his son to never let up. And his son promised that he would not. That's grit. Only a measure of resilience came in the sense of some satisfaction when the jury returned a verdict of guilty. But there was never any resilience that he felt from that case. He felt like he had done the best he could, but winning a case did not bring his family back. If it is true that if no one has died, everything can be fixed, it is equally true if someone has died, it cannot be completely fixed again. I hope to follow through with my friend Zanash at the grocery store. I hope to go back to Wake Forest soon and meet some of these people he mentioned. There were at least a baker's dozen that he mentioned, at least, still there. All of them, miraculously, that he mentioned, still alive. Those that have moved away, he gave me some addresses. He told me names of books that he had written. It's like reawakening yourself. I only want to mention this because this is my own personal story. And you may say, what does this have to do with grit? And what does this have to do with resilience? Well, I'll tell you. It was grit for those young people who did not move, to stay the course in the town they loved, to graduate from high school and go to college and make something of themselves when their lives had changed just as dramatically as ours did. The town that they had was all of a sudden no more. It was no different. It was no different from us. We went to a city where we didn't know anybody. They stayed in a town where half the people they knew were not any longer there. And yet they persisted. And many of them still live whereabouts in that town or in the little communities close by. That's grit. Mark became a lawyer, a clerk to a member of the North Carolina Supreme Court. John became a lawyer, not Mark. John became a lawyer. The North Carolina Supreme Court, Justice Branch, the Chief Justice. And he became a real estate developer. So successful. When he walked in, he had a full beard. I looked squarely, closely at him, and I could see his face that I once knew. But once he spoke, I smiled. I said, oh, I know that voice. I know that voice. I've known it almost all my life. What I'm trying to say to you all today is that each one of you all, I think, has friends, old friends you haven't talked to in a long time. I'm just telling you, it's not ever too late to reach out to these people. It is never too late to make a new one, like someone at a store, a random friend. It is never too late to have lunch with someone you knew once some time ago. Pick up the phone and call them. Do that. Then you can text and email later and stay in touch. But first, pick up the phone and call them. You'll be glad you did. Thanks for this abbreviated podcast today. I was questioning what I wanted to do for it until I saw Zanash at the grocery store this past weekend. Then it came to me. This is about friendship. Friendship works. It will make you smile. It will make your life better. Thanks so much. I hope really to have a program next week on the West Jefferson Hotel. And Lily, who is the general manager, has indicated to me that she's going to try and have some pictures. And if she does have pictures, I will let you know. Because if she does have these pictures, you want to see them. And you can see them either on Spotify or YouTube. And, my YouTube address is youtube.com/@Jim Stories. youtube.com/@Jim Stories. Try it out. Thanks, and have a great week, everyone.